So tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Liz King. Liz was a geology major at Carleton College in Minnesota. Mineralogy and petrology were her most difficult classes, so she decided she should spend her career as a mineralogist and petrologist. Her undergraduate thesis was on the granitic rocks of Mount Desert Island, Maine. Could be another talk. And that is where her love of granite began. Her master's and PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she moved into stable isotope geochemistry and granitic rocks. She worked on rocks of the Superior Province in Canada, the Idaho batholith to our west, and granites in the basin and range, looking at how our continent grew through time and what metamorphic events these rocks enjoyed. Liz spent 8 years on the faculty at Illinois State University until she got tenure. And then, of course, she quit and moved to Jackson. Good move. These days, and for quite a while now, she's been the development coordinator for the Teton Literacy Center. She also teaches intro geology and historical geology at Western Wyoming Community College and Northern Virginia Community College. The Q&A
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. Is my microphone working, hopefully? Thank you all for being here. Thanks for being on Zoom. The initial title to my talk tonight was going to be Undercover Geology at a Lead Zinc Mine in Nepal. And I was undercover because the mining company never really knew my intention of being there. I honestly didn't really know my intention of being there either, but they sure didn't think that I was there, to try and study the environmental impact of a lead zinc mine. And they honestly thought that as a geology major from the States, I was there going to be helping their case to try and get development going because they were still in the pre-development phase. So it was a little bit of a cat and mouse game up there, which was interesting. I thought that there were going to be a lot of environmental policies that were going to be broken at the mine. Turns out it's in Nepal. They're not really any environmental policies. So I had to really shift my mindset being up there. And it turned, still it was a very fascinating case for what's going on up at the mine. But, certainly as we'll see, many rumors, many mistruths about the mine, about what I was doing there, why it all was going down at this high altitude lead zinc mine. And it really is a snapshot of where I was at the time of my semester abroad. So it's not going to be super scientific-y. So some of you may sigh, deep sigh of relief. Some of you may be a little upset, but we'll try and balance it out. So just some background, what I was doing is fall 1992. So quite a while ago, my junior year, I was at Carleton College as a geology major. And I was a technology and policy studies minor, which morphed into environmental policy and politics, essentially. I traveled to Nepal for a semester with School for International Training, which is still in existence in Vermont, and they have school programs all over the world. But I decided to go to Nepal as as a geology student. It's an obvious draw there, the Himalayas. There were about 24 American students on the program. It turns out, ironically, 3 of them were from Carleton, which was total fluke. And one of the other ones I actually knew from previous Knowles courses. So it was a very small world. And I put my academics list up there, at least my geology courses up there so far as reference, because I'd only had intro, geomorphology, paleobiology, and structural geology at this point in my life. I had not had mineralogy, and this will come into play later because the mine was having me log drill core for the UN development project. And I was like, what, is that the blue mineral? I had clearly no idea what I was doing up there, and they didn't either. But the mine was counting on my structural geology and mineralogy background in order to help their case with the UN and get their funding. Is that better? Okay. All right, so just to get, again, background on our semester there before we dive into the mine. We got there to Kathmandu in September. We had intense language classes all day, basically, once we got there, as soon as we got on the ground. And then after we sort of got settled, we took a bus ride with everyone in the school and then trekked into the village of Toplajung, which is over here in far eastern Nepal, probably about a 2 or 3 day trek from the end of the road. And we had language class on the trail. So this is my group for the morning with our language teacher, Jyoti, right there. And Nothing but time to learn the language as you're trekking along. After our probably 2 weeks in Taplejung, where we had a homestay family visit with at least one other student as moral support, they turned us loose and let us meet back at the road when our bus was leaving. So we had multiple options for how we were going to get back there. I went with a group that went north, and we wanted to go see if we could see Kachenjunga, which is up here on the very border.
I'm sorry, this is Mike. Liz, you're not, the Zoom audience is not seeing the slides advance.
Oh, interesting. Let's see. We'll pause
It doesn't, also, it doesn't look like you're in the presentation view. Okay, you briefly were, but yeah.
Are the slides advancing for you now, Mike?
No, I don't see any slides at all. I'm just looking at you. You have to share your screen again.
Oh, hang on. You stopped sharing. Yep, stop sharing. Hang on. Okay, I'm going to go back a slide. Mike, is anything happening there?
Yeah, we're not seeing the presentation view. We are seeing your slide though. You could go back another one just to see.
Okay. Did the slide change just then?
No, it didn't change.
Are they moving?
And you're not in presentation view. In other words, we're seeing your list of slides on the left side of the screen.
Okay.
Now we're seeing the presentation view. Okay. Well, now we're back to the non-presentation view.
Well, I can expand this. I can just run it like this, and if it's big enough.
What do you see now, Mike?
Well, we're seeing the, okay, I haven't seen a change in, advance a slide.
Okay.
September intense language classes, Trek 2. Go ahead, and one more. Okay, I'm seeing it advance.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
We're still seeing you're still seeing your slides on the left side, but they're pretty small.
Yeah, and so if I go to play slide, it looks right for me, but not on Zoom apparently. So.
Yeah, you just cropped the slide by doing
We'll
what you did. Okay, let's go for it.
Yeah. Okay. Just
remove that floating menu bar if you go into more.
Where am I going?
This thing.
Oh yeah.
Drop that down and hide
Floating
menu meeting controls. Yeah, hide. Yeah. It might come back, but
Okay. All right. Well, go with slightly smaller version of the slides here. Okay, so anyway, we left the village. We took a couple days to trek north towards Kachenjunga. We didn't obviously get anywhere near to it. The weather was terrible during the whole trek. There's the end of the monsoons, but we were blessed, luckily, that the clouds split at sunrise one morning barely, and that is all we got to see at Kachenjunga. And then the window closed, and that was it. Okay, October for my semester, we were back in Kathmandu for the whole month doing language classes, culture seminars. They brought speakers to our schoolhouse for things from art, music, politics, you know, kind of everything under the sun to kind of introduce us to issues and concerns in Nepal. We had a solo homestay. So this here is my homestay mother. And then over here, I had 2 brothers and a sister. This is a random neighborhood kid, not in the family. And it's hard to see everyone here, but this is my full family. There was a father and I had a grandmother as well. We were in Kathmandu for Halloween, and it happened to be when Keanu Reeves was there filming The Little Buddha, so we invited him to our Halloween party. He sadly did not show up. But I went as a Nepal truck, and then a Tibetan woman and a movie star were some of the Halloween costumes. November in our semester was when we did our independent study projects, or ISPs. And so every student in the group proposed a topic, had to have budget and a research proposal and all of that. The school let us travel wherever we needed to in the country in order to get our ISP done. And it was every possible topic under the sun. There were some that went towards Everest to study yak cheese farming or yak cheese creation. Someone did some work with the Communist Party that was kind of getting going. There was an election time in Nepal. Some did some monastery retreats. Someone went up to Mustang that had literally opened that year to Western tourists and had some crazy experiences up there. I was in Kathmandu for most of it. On the left here is a marble mine in Kathmandu. It was kind of my backup project if things didn't really work out with the lead zinc mine. But I did obviously get to the lead zinc mine in the middle and then had enough time at the end. I went trekking in Longtong National Park as I wrote up my project. And then just to finish up our semester, SIT did a really good job of integrating us back to Western lifestyle because we'd been so off the grid for so long. And they didn't want to just put us on a plane back home after 4 months. And so we did a rafting trip down one of the major rivers, and it felt like we were staying at the Four Seasons to roll into camp and have our tent set up for us. And then we went down to Chitwan National Park for a safari. And again, to have hot water bottles in our bed was like otherworldly compared to what we've been doing. So that's how we finished things up. And then they put us all back in a plane back home. Okay, so my ISP, I met with Rajendra Shrestha, a geologist at the Department of Mines and Geology, and we're brainstorming topics. It was a primarily language and culture program, so they weren't really lined up in all these pre-programs, STEM topics for me to be considering. So we brainstormed a lot of topics. Phosphorite exploration, gemstones of Nepal, obviously a lot of engineering geology possibilities in Nepal and their roads and landslides. He was going to be doing some field work that I could have joined in on. Oil development in southern Nepal was fascinating, but everyone right away was like, oh, that's super secret. So I knew that was not going to go anywhere. The Ganesh Himal project came up, and then that marble quarry south of Kathmandu, so that was, the marble quarry was my backup. There was going to be an interesting study nonetheless, and I did do a little work on it just in case, but the Ganesh Himal was really intriguing for a lot of different reasons. And it really sealed the deal when I found this Himal magazine story from a couple of years before I was there, talking about resource development, balancing economic benefit, environmental impacts in developing countries. And, so I could tell there was going to be a lot going on in this project rather than just pure science. So it was really interesting to me to try and make this project work, but it was not going to be easy. Just some background research again in mining and environmentalism in Nepal. The 1966 Nepal Mines Act really was the first legislation on the books in Nepal, and pretty much all it said was that all the minerals are the property of His Majesty's government. At this point, Nepal was still a monarchy until early 2000s, and so that things have changed a little bit now that they've gotten different government and a democratic government. The next policy on their books was 1985 Mines and Minerals Act, saying that the government can limit mining in areas if there's historical or religious importance. Landowners can be compensated. This is a difficult reality, though, because the Department of Mines and Geology is in Kathmandu, and these mines are scattered all over in incredibly remote areas of the country. So, good in theory to have on the books, but it was going to be incredibly difficult to have it really come into play. So the status of mining in Nepal in 1992, the government encouraged private sector to be involved. They realized they were not going to be able to take this on all by themselves, and were looking towards external investors. And this was a big deal because Nepal, again, was still kind of opening up. It was open, but still really not fully open. So it really essentially meant India and China as their big investors. And there's a lot of politics between those countries. So it was a big move for them to, even be open to the concept of India coming in and helping them with their development. And a fabulous quote that I came across in my research of, it is evident that in spite of yearly heavy capital input, it has yet not yielded much in return. Those mineral deposits, which were known a decade back, still remain in the top of the list of mineral resources. None of the policy measures appear to have any positive impact on the growth of the mining activity in the near future, and this will perhaps remain to be a sector without any direct return, which will have bearing on the development of the national economy. And this was 92, and things haven't really changed significantly since then. So I think we're spot on for what it was like. Okay, so my background research, it turned out the general manager of the mine was going to be going up to the mine for 4 days at the end of November. So it was fortuitous timing for me, but it didn't make it easy because I couldn't just hop on a car with him. I still needed unbelievable amounts of permissions, from formal permission from the Nepal Metal Company, general manager, permission from the National Council of Science and Technology, the Director General of Departments of Mine and Geology. I needed all of these permission letters. And so it was, again, going to take a long time to meet everyone, explain what I was doing, what I thought I was doing, and get permissions. And I also needed trekking permits. And trekking permits are easy to get at all. However, they're very policed, especially I was up near a national park. And if you are in an area that that is not in your trekking permit, it's bad news. And so rereading through my journals, I actually had to slip in the names of the villages that I was going to in the mine and hope that they didn't get X'd out by the permit department. And thankfully, they did not notice them and they did not cross them out. But that would have been not good news for me getting up there if they had realized that. And I had forgotten that my trekking permit, all my letters of permission were so important. I actually locked them up at the schoolhouse until the day we left for the mine, just because I was not going to have like anything happen to all these pieces that had to fall in place. While I was working on this, while I was waiting for the mine general manager to have his trip up there, I did interviews with the Himal magazine editor, tried to find the author of that magazine article, but couldn't. UN Development Project, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, Departments of Mine and Geology, Internal Center for Integrated Mountain Development, and the Nepal Forum for Environmental Journalists, Department of Industry, basically anyone who might know anything about this mine, what was going on up there, what the future would look like. And it turns out really no one knew what was going on, besides nothing was going on. But there was certainly, everyone I talked to was like, let us know what you find. So history of the mine. The Hyderabad Industries Limited from India found lead and zinc deposits up in the valley, up in the Ganesh Himal region in the 1970s, and they explored it with a company out of Quebec. The first deposit was found at just shy of 15,000 feet, and there are actually 6 mineralized zones up there. So in 1973, a project report was submitted to the government and it was approved. For that, but the project report said that it was viable only if the infrastructure of the road and power was provided by the government. And so in 75, 2 years later, the government approved the project. And so Nepal Metal Company was formed in 76. So again, 75, the government said, we can do this. And yes, we will build the road and put electricity there. In 83, nothing had changed. There still was no road and no power. But they knew, obviously, that there was significant mineralization up there. So the mining company turned to the International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank, trying to get funding from them. The project was approved at 12 million initially. I think it got up to 18 million. The IFC said they would provide $3 million if the infrastructure was completed by the government by 1986. So they had 3 years to get it done. Didn't happen still. And so the IFC said, well, we're not disinterested. However, we need a UN development project feasibility study before we commit any cash to this. And the road and electricity would be good to have too. So still things are stagnating by 1986. And in 1992, the UN feasibility study was completed. So again, that was the year that I was there. Outcomes of the study was that there was not enough data on the known amount of lead and zinc up there. And so without that known quantity, the UNDP is not providing their equipment, the IFC won't provide the money, the project won't go. So here I come on the scene, like this is kind of, it's, a very fortuitous timing that all of this was in place. They really just needed to know how much ore was up there in order to get this project going. And, here comes the American geologist that's going to log their core and solve the problem for them. Just to back up a little bit, some really brief Himalayan regional geology, like why are these mountains there? Why are they so big? Why are there mines at 15,000 feet? 70 million years ago, India started fast tracking north towards Eurasia. These are both continental plates So they're both really buoyant. Neither of them wants to go down into the mantle. So if you look at just a generic continent collision zone here on the right, two pieces of continental crust, neither of them want to go down. There's an immense amount of force behind these pieces of crust colliding together, especially Eurasia is big. And so really the only way to go is up. And so that's why these continental collisions are so enormous. If you look at a cross section for a generalized cross section through Nepal, you can see at the bottom here is the Indian plate. Again, it's cruising northwards, the Eurasian plate on the north side of things, the Tibetan plateau. And all of this topography is in between in this collision zone between India and Eurasia. And it's always impresses me that the southern part of Nepal down here, what's labeled as the Terai, incredibly flat, as you'll see in just a minute, elevation of about 300 feet. And as the crow flies in about 200 miles, you go from 300 feet to the top of Mount Everest. So again, to give you an idea of, it's like two Mack trucks colliding and neither of them stopping. They're just compressing and you can see it in the very cartoonized, but all the deformation that happens during this collision. So just some slides here of what it looks like as you go from north to south, south to north through Nepal. This is down in the Terai, so again, super flat. And the rice paddies are, kind of as I envision them in India, just miles of very flat rice paddies. As you get towards Kathmandu, so kind of partway up the country, it starts getting a little bit hillier. You can see here the rice paddies start getting terraced. Again, these are still like not even foothills in the scheme of things in Nepal. And then as you get to the higher mountains, this is, kind of a typical, not even the higher Himalayas, but higher mountain valleys. And, when you're trekking, if you've been in there, trekking in Nepal, that you often have a village here and a village here, and the only way to get there is go down and back up again. So it's, thousands of feet up and down to trek through the country. So here, these are the higher Himalayas here as seen from Kathmandu. In the middle of this photograph is the smog of Kathmandu, and it's clear you can see the higher mountains in the background. And then this, of course, is the Everest region here with, the highest of the Himalayas. So a real simple cross section. I don't want to spend too long on here through Nepal, but going from the south to the north on the right. Again, here's the Indian plate diving under the Eurasian plate. And it's a very complicated collision zone. And the way that a lot of this collision gets accommodated is through these thrust faults. So this main frontal thrust here, main boundary thrust down in the southern part of Nepal. And then the main central thrust will come into play here for the Ganesh Himal, but this is sort of up in the higher Himalayan region where this thrust fault is. Here's the geologic map of Nepal, and I like this map because it shows these thrust faults I just talked about. So the main frontal thrust down here in the south side of things, where again things are quite flat. Main boundary thrust is the next one just to the north. Main central thrust is right up here. So again, in the higher mountains, it does this fun little jog around Kathmandu. But this is how that accommodation is happening from all the collision zones, if in addition to mountains going up. So the mine, it's not noted, not starred on here, but this square that my cursor is on is Longtong National Park. That is just to the east of where the mine is. And why I show this is because here's the main central thrust, basically running through the national park, and the mine sits just a few miles south of that main central thrust zone. All right, so the sciencey part of tonight. The rocks that are at Ganesh Himal are all metasedimentary rocks that have been pretty significantly deformed and also heated up during their metamorphism in fibrillite facies. So 500 plus degrees at C for their temperatures during the metamorphism. Interestingly enough, though, lead isotopes on the ore suggest an age of over 800 million years for the age of the ore. So, I mentioned India started moving north 70 million years ago. This is another 800 million years before that. So the ore predates any of the mountain formation, and it's back from when the sediments were originally deposited on the seafloor, well before India was even around. The rocks of the mine, alternating schists and fibrilites, quartzites, and carbonates. And the carbonates are actually what host the ore. Then I mentioned there's 6 mineralized zones, all being within one dolomite bearing layer. So again, these These would have been flatline sedimentary rocks 800 million years ago, and the ore that is there now was all from the original sedimentary environment. So nothing to do with the creation of the Himalayas. The structure of the mine here, it's all in this really tight syncline. So here's my cartoon version of the syncline. I mentioned that the carbonates were hosting the ore. So this orange layer here is the white dolomite. That's actually the layer that has all the ore in it. There's a little bit in the black dolomite, and a lot of the country rock is this garnet mica schist. It's not huge, and this is 500 meters along here, along the axis of the fold, and about 100 meters wide. So it's not very extensive. Sulfides are primarily sphalerite for where the zinc is, and also biotite, phlogopite, actinolite, and all the minerals that at that point I had never seen before, but was having to report to the UN for how much percent was in the drill core. I know these are really small figures here from this publication in '96. On the right, though, is a map view of the mine. So it's, this bar down here is 100 meters. So this would be your 500 meters roughly of the syncline that I just showed you. And then a cross section through the middle of this map, this plan view on the right is shown here. And so the main mine is down, the mine added is down at the bottom. And all these little plus marks would be where the mineralization intersects with their drill coring. So they estimated again, in that just the one that they've explored, one ore body they explored, about 1.3 million tons of ore with 13% zinc, 2% lead. So significant, certainly at the time, the largest known metal deposit in the Himalayas. So there's a reason that the UN and the World Bank were taking a look at this. As of November '92, there were 89 underground diamond drilling holes that had been completed in the mine. So here's, again, this syncline that I showed you before, and these little lines would be all of their drill cores into it. The longest ones went 360 feet into the rock, and they were taking these cores. Some were being sent to Canada to be analyzed. Most of them were sitting in a drill core shack at the mine and estimating lead and zinc based on the mineralogy they were finding in the drill cores. And so again, the UN development project was requiring all this drilling before investment occurred. And so when I was up there in '92, they were not actively expanding the tunnel of the mine. They were just drilling and drilling and drilling and creating all this drill core. One of my favorite quotes for the mine from their feasibility study: in spite of lower labor productivity, the very low wage rate existing in Nepal makes the project economically viable. Not a good sign for your feasibility study to be hanging its hat on that. All right, so off we go to the mine and my few days that were up there. And I showed you two different versions of the same map. I like the topography shown better on the one on the right, but the stars are the same for what is where. The southern star on here is the village question mark of Somdong, which is the end of the road. And then the next star up is where the Nepal Metal Company mine site actually is. And I put a star up here for this is where Ganesh Himal is. There's a lot of climbing expeditions. So that's kind of where they're headed to, just north of where the mine actually is. All right, so how you get there, and for those of you who've traveled in Nepal, travel is not insignificant to get around the country. So I think it is worthwhile to hit home how difficult it is to get up there. Kathmandu is located right here, and you get 55 kilometers on a blacktop road, which is smooth sailing, to Trisali Bazaar. And so this is what we did. I got in a vehicle November 20th, I think it was, with our driver, the general manager of the mine, a mining geologist, a mining architect, and a local police officer that were just driving home who happened to live along the way somewhere. So there's 6 of us in the Land Cruiser that headed out. This is the first couple hours of our journey to get there. The next many hours were from Trisali Bazaar. So from here north to Cyberbase, and this is 70 kilometers on an unpaved road that Google Maps optimistically says it's going to take 5.5 hours. It does not, so ignore their timing. And I should say also here, pointed out here, Longtong National Park is right here on the edge of this map here. So again, the mine is over here and the national park is over here. So the road partially that we traveled on going up in between those two. And then the last part of the drive is the best part from Cyberbase all the way up to Samdong, the end of the road. I like to zoom in on the right here of this Cyberbase to Samdong, so you can see what it takes to drive all the way there on 30 kilometers. This part of the road is actually, when it was finally built, it was built by the army, which many people in the neighboring villages were really skeptical about, wondering what the army was doing there, why there's so many army camps, why the army built the road, why wasn't it, the public works. One of the many reasons that people were, really didn't know what was going on up there at the mine. But it took us 10 hours to go 155 kilometers in dry season. And so add in winter or monsoon, and it's near impossible to get up there. And this will come into play as think about all the ore they're extracting up here and they need to get it to market. It's pretty incredible. So here's Samdong, the end of the road. I can't really call it a town because it's that one building. We spent the night in this building after our 10-hour drive. I think that was probably our Land Cruiser recovering from the drive. This is the general manager of the mine, Mr. Chakrabarti, and then the geologist and the mining architect. So it was kind of the four of us that finished the rest of the journey from here. So the end of the road is at 10,000 feet, just shy of 11,000 feet. Your final approach to the next, we spent the night in that building at the end of the road. Then we hiked up to the mine, which is officially in the town again, of Paigutong. So it's another 4-mile hike, gaining 2,600 feet to get up there. And as you'll see in all these slides, the Nepal Electrical Authority did install electricity all the way up there. So it was not the army, but it was actually more of an official governmental body that installed the electricity. But here's the sign showing you're at base camp at Samdong. You'll see different spellings because it's all phonetic anyway. But we headed up this valley, this direction to get up to the mine. Oops, hang on. So here's our hike up. There's the faithful electrical poles heading up for thousands of feet up to where the mine is, but kind of typical views as we went up the valley to Paigutong. Here's the general manager in his faithful white hat, and the other two guys with us hiking up the trail. You can see, going all the way down the valley. And again, think of the reverse when this is operational, the ore is going back down this valley. So clearly we need to advance beyond the trail. And it's really cryptic to see, but here's the mining. There's mining buildings up here in this bottom left photo. And then this piece right here is actually the debris pile of stuff coming out of the mine at it. So this is end of the road, end of the trail. It's not even end of the road for where the mine is. So we hiked up there, I think November 21st in my timeline. And so this is a view of Paigutong. This is the compressor house right here, which is front and center in all these photos. It's really difficult to see, but the mine at it itself is right on the very right side and kind of the shadow of the slide. The official sign, because if it's a sign, it's official. I had in my notes there was actually a police station up here too, which I don't remember at all, but apparently it was there. But this is the kind of boarding house down here behind the sign. So the where everyone was staying and where all the meals were eaten. And it was just like any other mining camp. There was TV, there was a ping pong table, miles in from the road, miles from a real road. Fireplace. It was kind of like any other mining camp. The afternoon we got up there, we hiked up to the main adit. So here's the entrance, right, and you can see there's a railroad track. At the time, I think it was the only 2 kilometers of railroad track in the country of Nepal. And so some of the workers here, the mining company outfitted them all with headlamps and raincoats and boots. And I was actually impressed. All the employees there, except for one mining architect, were Nepalese. So it's contrary to a lot of the other mining activities that I was starting to research in the country that, with the Indian investment, it was all Indian employees, but it was actually all Nepalese up there. They, of course, were wondering what I was doing up there, and I was wondering what they were doing up there. And, but they're a great group of people. And so here you can see the workers coming out of the mine with these full rail cars. And again, they're not actively blasting to extend this 2-kilometer adit. This is all part of their drilling operations to try and estimate how much ore they're finding there. The next day we woke up, a beautiful day. And so here again, a view from the boarding house, but there's the compressor building here. This is the headlamp issuing building. And then the tailings pile or the debris pile kind of here on the right. And it's, the photo on the right shows that debris pile better. Everything just taken out of the mine, dumped over the edge. There's rivers, just water coming out of the mine as well. And again, you can see power lines going all over the place up here. And there's, you can sort of see some water pipes going through here. So, you know, everything is up on the ground to make this all work in the mine. Again, this is the building here of, you know, where everyone was staying. There were about 50 workers up there full time. At the time, they were envisioning it got to be 700 when they were fully operational. At the time, though, everyone was staying up here at the mine site in this building. And so there's, yeah, this rock building is where the ping pong table was and the TV and the dining hall. So a view down on camp, this is more like the residential side of things at, you know, 14,000 feet. And then we hiked up above the mine, and you can see in the background the peak of Ganesh Himal. And again, a lot of climbing expeditions were heading up there as well. Looking down on the mine at it here, you can see the railroad tracks. This is, I think, the headlamp issuing building, which is shockingly big for just issuing headlamps. And then the rail cars out on the edge of that cliff there. And so they would, again, do their drilling, remove all the material that wasn't part of the drill core, throw it in these rail cars, run it out here and just tip it over the edge. Here's the general manager on the right, and the architect and the geologist looking at some of the rocks. We did go into the mining adit with headlamps, and that is where they had me measuring strike and dip on folds and plunges on folds. And, you know, structural geology I'd had, but in Minnesota where the rocks are flat. And so I'd never actually done structural geology, but they were taking my strikes and dips and writing them in their notebooks for the UN. I was like, this is scary. Just a preview of things to come. The next day we woke up to this in the end of November, and there's 6 inches of snow, howling winds, 15 degrees, and the power was out. The power actually goes out quite a bit up there, but certainly in conditions like this. So there's no generator up there, only compressors. And so when the power is out, everything stops, and the miners will come out of the tunnel, but just go hang out by the fire, wait for the power to come back on and go back in and start drilling. And so this, again, here's that compressor house. This is where the rail cars would be sitting up in here. And so everything is at a total standstill waiting for the power to come back on. And in this day, actually, a British climbing expedition ended up coming into camp. They were driven off the peak like 200 meters from the top because of the storm. And as much, you know, the protection we had was better than anything they had in the mountain, even though we had no heat and the wind was blowing through that rock building. It was pretty grim. But as soon as the power comes back on, the workers are back up there. And I think at this point, they've got to be pushing their rail cars because they couldn't get the little engine that could to work through all the snow. So they're trying their best to push their rail cars out in the very snowy conditions. But again, power was on and off and on and off. And that's just kind of the way of life up there at the mine site. So we then left the next day. It was our intended departure day anyway, and it certainly is. You know, we didn't totally abort the mission because of the snowstorm, but it was not a bad thing to be leaving when we did. So this is as we headed down the valley. Again, here is that debris pile, so you can see some of the fresher things that they had dumped on top of since the snow fell. And the buildings are really hard to pick out in here, but they'll be sort of in this part of the slide. And then this is a photo from Samdong back to the end of the road. Looking back up the valley, and you see how much more snow is in the peaks then as well. So we hiked down and we waited because there was pre-cell phones. We had an arranged time for the car to come meet us at the end of the road. And I'll explain a little bit later, they could not make it there to pick us up. So we then had to start hiking out further. But just some of the mine operation details that I got from the general manager when we were up there, and the architect and the engineers. They had hoped to be fully operational by 95, so 3 years after I had been there. Some of the key components they were missing to be fully operational were that they needed a mill site, and they were hoping to do that 500 meters below the adit, so in this valley that you could see in the slide. Obviously, they would need to build the road up to where the mill is, which was going to be, you know, significant extension of the road. Their solution for how to get the ore down there was just a steep conveyor belt to carry it all the way down to where the mill is from the mine sites. And the crushing, grinding, floating, all that sort of thing would happen down there at the mill site. And that's also where they would put the housing for the 700 workers they envisioned being there when they needed them full time. They did recognize that the tailings were some of the largest problems facing the operations. And so that, the architect was like, we're working on that, trying to figure out how to, put all their tailings ponds in this incredibly steep valley. And then interestingly enough, their business model was to send the ore concentrates to India for smelting, which is, over 1,000 miles away, reverse the road, the trip in that I described to you, but even farther down to the Indian border. So they would truck it down to the Indian border and then send it off to smelters in India. And it was fascinating, the different reasonings for that, and that they honestly said they'd rather India have the environmental problems of the smelter than have Nepal deal with it. And in a fascinating business model, India paid, at the time anyway, 50% more than an international market value for lead and zinc. So it was going to work out well for them anyway. So yeah, I mean, they had to, build the road, get the trucks, all that sort of thing to get the ore down to India, but yet still economically, work for them. So some of the infrastructure issues that I noticed, and again, this is, very qualitative undergrad geology view of what was going on up there at the mine. It's obviously an issue that the power gets cut when the wind blows. Here at 14,000 feet, the wind does blow. And there's no generator up there, so it's totally dependent on electricity for all its operations. I mean, they've got a fireplace in the bunkhouse and the cooking can happen, but in terms of anything operational, it's not going to happen. So it's comical how much they just come in and out, waiting for the power to come back on so they can get back to work. Other infrastructure issues, again, that snowstorm we experienced closed the road, as we realized as we got down here, Samdong, the end of the road, sat there for a couple hours and our car never appeared. So we're like, all right, guess we'll start hiking. Hiked all the way out to about where Gatlong is, about halfway down that road. And there were a lot of army camps all along this road because the army built the road. And so we were like post-holing through knee-deep snow, trees had fallen across the road. And we finally got to an army camp, spent the night. We spent the next day waiting for the car still didn't appear. So we're like, all right, we're going to continue hiking. So we hiked all the way out to Cyberbase. And at that point, I, being the white American, got a ride with another army general down to Dunche, and the rest of the crew eventually made their way down there, and then they hooked up with their car and went back to Kathmandu. And that's when I went up to Longtong to do the trek there. But the road is a big issue, especially that last little bit. So the general manager, Mr. Chakrabarty, foresaw snowplows, sand and salt trucks, graders, keeping the road open year round. Again, the problem is that while the army built the road, the jurisdiction is with the Nepalese road maintenance, sort of their YDOT, and they're not locally situated at all. So it would be a lot to maneuver to get all the support they need up there, especially if they're counting on Nepalese road maintenance, not their own company maintenance to keep that road open. Other infrastructure issues, earthquakes. And so again, this is the house where we all were living up at the mine and all the workers live, and not particularly earthquake safe. And remember those big thrust faults that I mentioned, that's just to the north of where the mine is. There was a huge earthquake in 2015. This is in Longtong National Park, so just east of the mine. And on the left is a village that was thriving until the earthquake, and the right is the village after the earthquake and all the landslides and just decimated it. So the mine is still standing, but they definitely suffered some structural damage during that earthquake. So, that thrust fault and the earthquakes in the Himalayas are not anything to make light of at all. Another great quote in my research from the UN Development Project Environmental Impact Report: because Ganesh Himal is an underground mine, most of the associated environmental problems should be controllable and therefore not a serious threat to the local environment and ecology of the region. So I think at this point, I started becoming very jaded in the science that was being done at the UNDP, but it's all right. Some of the highlights of their report was that there was going to be no deforestation at the mine, which granted, by the adit, they're well above tree line, but down where they wanted to build the mine and the mill and house 700 workers was down in a rhododendron forest. The report said there's going to be no aquatic life impact, which, again, I'm not a biologist by any means. I cannot imagine the streams up there are sterile. There's got to be something going on. They said there's no wildlife impact, and it's, not the tropical jungles, but there's definitely wildlife there. They said categorically no plant life impacts. But even folks at the mine said that, obviously this debris pile out here is changing things, in that, which also ties into the insignificant landscape deformation. Everyone at the mine was like 10 years ago, it looked totally different. So it just seemed like a lot of the points that the UNDP environmental impact report were not realistic and maybe not ground truth. I don't know how much time they spent up there when they were writing that report. Other things not mentioned in the UNDP report is discussing increased sediment load in the river, which is up in the valley that we hiked up to where the mine is, the Mylang River. And this feeds into the Tricely River, and there's a huge hydro project that has gotten even bigger since I was there. And so the issues of silting up that hydro project were not even thought of by the UN Development Project. And then health impacts of surface water consumption, whether it's contamination from just sediments and silts, or if any of the lead and the zinc from the tailings mines. I mean, all water consumption in Nepal is straight out of the river, and everything you do is in the river, from the river. So it's unrealistic to think that what's going on at the headwaters of this stream are not going to impact things downstream. And so health impacts on the villages were not mentioned at all in the report either. So the impacts of my study, well, I left a final copy of my report, which it was Nepal in '92. I hand wrote and then had to go find a computer lab in Kathmandu that had electricity that I could type this up on and pay per hour to type up my report. And then find a Xerox that actually had electricity that I could make copies. But I left it with the UNDP and the IUCN in Kathmandu. I did not leave one at the mining company again, feeling like a terrible person that I had this man bring me up to his mine and he didn't really know what I was doing or what I was going to write about. The UNDP encouraged me to mail a copy to the director of the UNDP Bureau for Program Policy and Evaluation in New York, which I did. And he then forwarded on to the manager of the Energy and Natural Resource Group of the UNDP and the chief of the West and South Asia Division Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific, the UNDP. So it circulated farther than I ever anticipated. And I never heard anything after that. And I honestly did not expect to hear anything after that. It was not a scientific, quantitative study by any means. There's my observations 4 days at the mine site. But what is there now? Well, still the same old, nothing really has changed. This article is from 2020 in the Himalaya News Service that the state-owned mining company remains closed. So it actually closed around 2005. And so the official party line is that the civil war going on in Nepal made the work very difficult. And so work has never resumed. And so a photo from their article, obviously much warmer time of year than when I was there, but things kind of still look very much the same. And then here's another photo again, like, straight out of the boarding house view, like what I had. Again, here's the compressor house, there's the headlamp issuing house, the river coming out, and then that tailings pile. And so this was, I think, from 2008, maybe. So like nothing has moved or changed since 1992. Interestingly enough, though, the mining company, while they're closed, still has employees, and they still have 7 employees living at the mine at the time that this article came out. Kind of hoping that maybe they can start drilling again. Poor guys. I think there's a couple, office folks back in Kathmandu, but they still got drivers and tunnel diggers sitting up there at 14,000 feet, hoping for the day when funding comes through. So takeaways for me on this, I went in, kind of wanted to be your idealistic liberal arts student, wanting to, crucify a company for doing terrible things to the environment. And it became really readily apparent that it wasn't going to happen. So it definitely shifted in sort of environmental policy, politics, balancing resource management and developing countries. And so the strong need for an environmental component in Nepal's development projects, but for resource management and development to proceed hand in hand. And so just the collaboration between all the agencies like the IUCN and all the different funding agencies in the government to do the best research and the best development. And obviously now, it's really complicated in developing countries. But I think the biggest thing for me, especially now looking back at the UN feasibility reports and environmental impact studies, just the need for good science behind international funding projects. Regardless of which way they go, whether they're funded or not. I mean, it honestly is, it's laughable to look at the science that went into that feasibility study and the environmental impact report for the Ganesh Himal mine. So final quote for you for takeaways: although it is wrong to squander the God-given capital resources or consider Earth as a legitimate quarry, it is also a crime against humanity to ignore the need of an aspiring society and close your mind to the bare necessity at the pretext of conservation or environmental protection. So I think just really summarize well kind of my shift back to, it's a bigger picture rather than just going after the bad guy who's extracting things from the earth. So with that, I'll take questions. Right.
So Liz, one question that comes to mind, the water you were drinking was coming out of the mine.
Correct.
And I'm sure it never got tested for heavy metals, but it's in a lead zinc mine.
Correct.
Uh,
My kids turned out okay.
So the question is, what was there any concern about that?
Oh, no.
And so you need to repeat, I don't think Zoom could hear me.
Okay, so the question was about water quality when I was at the mine, and the water was coming out of the lead zinc mine, and was there concern of safety issues drinking the water, and it was, I was treating it for giardia, but not for lead and zinc consumption. Yeah, luckily I was there for 4 days, and I was sick all the time in Nepal, so it was probably just another reason to be sick. Yeah, but no, I mean, it's shocking again that like water quality is, water quality is not thought of at the time anyway in Nepal much at all. I mean, everything goes in the rivers and everything, then everything comes out of the rivers. So, yeah, it's it.
So Mike Adler should go and assume the questions.
Okay.
You might have to stop sharing, or you don't have to.
Go back to Zoom. I don't know. Oops, no.
Liz,
Yeah.
whatever possessed anybody to originally find any kind of deposit at 14,000 feet, up, valleys, no roads. So how did this mine get discovered in the first place?
Great question. The question was about how the mine got discovered in the first place, being at 14,000 feet days, from the end of the road, especially at that time. Luckily, it does crop out at the surface. So that syncline fold does go, uphill, and so they could find it then. And, I can't imagine it was climbers that all of a sudden are like, oh, look at all this sphalerite that happens to be here. But there's probably enough traffic through there. I mean, certainly the porters think the mine is there for gemstones. And so they're always looking for gemstones as they're passing through, and maybe, eventually found its way to a mining company in India where they're like, oh, I know what that is and what that means. Yeah, but how it was first found in 1970, I don't really know the story behind that. But luckily, again, it crops out at the surface. So that'll help them track it down.
How was the electricity generated? Is that hydro?
The electricity at the mine, how it was generated, it was probably hydro, especially with that hydro project downstream. And what that was operational, it has grown. There's been a few more stages of that since, but the first stage of that hydro project was going. And so my guess is it's going to be hydro trying to get its way up the power lines. Yeah.
Where are other places that they can zinc? Is it a common mineral, rare?
The mineral sphalerite, zinc sulfide. The question, sorry, was other places to get zinc from. That, yeah, it's not an uncommon mineral. And so I'm trying to think of other big lead zinc deposits.
Franklin, New Jersey.
Franklin, New Jersey. Yeah, there you go.
Drive right up to it.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, to having concentrations that it's economically viable is obviously a more uncommon situation, but it's not, this is like by no means the only lead zinc mine in the world. Yeah.
Seems crazy.
I know. It does. Question.
So you mentioned early that one of your objectives of the study was to identify an approximate amount of ore located in the area. And I didn't hear whether you actually did that.
I did spend an afternoon in the drilling shed with the geologists, trying to estimate from their drill core. And, you know, he's like, what percentage phlogopite? I'm like, is that the red one? 10%? So I had in my journals that we logged like 300 feet of core that would have gone in their journals to go off to the UN to, again, provide that they had a significant amount of deposits there.
To make the infrastructure investments, you have to be assured of, I mean, whether you're going for oil or whatever, you've got to rest assured. That you
Yes, hello, Mike.
So I definitely did not solve that.
Yeah, I have
And, you know,
one
they somehow
in
seem to
one
think
aisle.
that I was.
No, I'm still here. Yeah, I was waiting
Mike?
for you to ask about it, so, yeah. Okay, so, yeah.
Mike, we got one more question in the room that was somebody asked. Yeah.
For the workforce that was out there, you said we're primarily Nepal folks. Were they from local communities or local far away? And what were their perceptions of the mine itself?
The question was about the local workforce, where they were from and perceptions of the mine. They were very local, and I can't remember what you know, sort of subgroup of Nepalese they were, but they were definitely, you know, they weren't as close to being, you know, Tibetan on that close to the border as you could be, but still Nepalese. Tamang might have been their ethnic origin. Anyway, so the majority of them were, and I don't think they really wondered much about, you know, perceptions of the mine. You know, they were happy to be employed, even though they were getting paid like 50 cents a day, but it was a job. And they were not, you know, getting trucked in from southern Nepal or anything like that. I was really surprised that they were seemingly from local villages. And yeah, and they seemed to be really treated well and got along really well with the few, you know, sea-level folks that were coming in and staying in the boarding house with them. I mean, it was very collegial, which was great to see.
Do you want to ask Mike if there's some Zoom questions?
Yeah, Mike, are there Zoom questions?
Yeah, there was one question here, which was, what are the silver and gold credits in the ore, if there are any?
I don't think there was much silver and gold in there that was reported in any of their mineralogy. There are some sulfides, but not silver and gold that I remember.
Okay, and I just had a personal question for you. What was the essence of your report? What did, if you're willing to share that, what did you have to say about what you saw there? Maybe you don't want to comment.
It honestly, in my final report, it's very similar to what I told you guys here. And
Okay.
that's, you know, yeah, that I had, and there's, you know, my personal sort of reflections were more in the postscript than the actual report. But yeah, that at the, you know, the very end of the appendix, I said I had wanted to take a, you know, more of a Western view on a operating mineral exploration procedure to, you know, see what they were doing wrong and violating, but quickly learned that it wasn't going to happen because there's nothing to violate, and they also really weren't operating.
Is there likely to be any, do you see any chance that that actually is going to be continue? You mentioned there are actually still people up there waiting. Is that likely to be like a forever wait?
It might be a forever wait to those poor guys sitting up there. I don't envision that this is going to fly unless, you know, zinc prices explode. But there's just so much. I mean, none of the infrastructure's changed from what I can tell since 1992. So I think it's done. If I were to guess. Yeah, question in the room.
Are there any physical effects that you noticed?
Question was physical effects working at the altitude. I am sure the Nepalese workers are all very acclimated, much like the, the trekkers and the Sherpas for the Everest expeditions. It's life is normal. I definitely noticed. My one clear memory is when the power was out and it was 15 degrees, sitting in my sleeping bag with all my layers on, eating cookies, and I had to like stop because I was running out of breath, and I was like chewing like. And I wasn't up there for that long, but the Nepalese are just so acclimated to all the high altitude that there's not an issue for them that I could tell. Great question though, Cynthia.
How did you get supplies up there, food and fuel?
The question is how you get supplies up there. Everything is carried up. Fuel, food, TV, ping pong table, railroad tracks. I mean, some of it may have been helicoptered in, but like the day to day, I mean, beyond like some of the big pieces moving in, like the railroad cars, I would imagine would have been helicoptered in, but everything is carried uphill.
By people or
By people. In some parts of the country, it might be done by yaks, but there's not yaks in this part of Nepal, so it's all manpower carrying it up. Yeah, right.
Could you describe for us what you were eating? Like,
Question is what I was eating when I was at the mine, when I wasn't getting out of breath eating cookies. It's every meal in Nepal is dal bhat, so it's curried lentils, curried vegetables, and rice, and probably not much meat. I mean, meat is very expensive there anyway, and especially up at the mine to get it there. I'm sure it's just potatoes and maybe cauliflower if you're lucky, and some lentils and some rice. That's all you got. It's only 2 times a day. They really only eat that 2 times a day. Yeah, thankfully not 3.
There was one more question.
Starving your whole walk out.
Yes, Mike, go ahead.
There was one more question from the Zoom audience. You briefly touched on it, but the question was, how does the ore get down? And the fact is that, well, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, so the drill cores now would have been carried out to the road and then shipped off to Canada. And eventually they were going to build, they had envisioned building like a, conveyor belt to bring it downhill to the mine mill site, which would be where the road would be extended to. They also envisioned, I forgot to mention, a similar kind of rope tow uphill for the workers. So the 700 workers down by the mill site to get up to them, rather than making them, they were nice, not gonna make them hike up every day or every shift, but have some sort of rope tow to get them up there. But yeah, the ore would be mechanically brought downhill, and then in theory, meeting up with the road and getting into the truck is off to India. Dan?
Well, one comment, you actually made a comment about the tailings. And it looked like there was a huge pile of tailings just from kind of the preparatory stuff. Once it got into production, the tailings pile had to be, it would be enormous, and they didn't even consider that an issue?
The question was about the tailings that would be generated when they were operational. They did recognize that as being their big problem, but they had not come up with a solution for it yet. And I can't remember the estimates for how many, square kilometers of tailings that were going to be generated when they were fully operational. But it's, just from the little bit they've done, which is a small fraction of what they would be doing when they were operational. So those would probably get sent down the hill. Well, I don't know. I mean, they might get sent down the hill with the ore. It might just keep getting dumped over the edge and see what happens. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It's the road of tailings. Dan.
You saw some ore in the sheds. I guess they have them and some.
The question is about the core and sort of more details on that. Yeah, they're, they drilled up to what, 350 feet into the tunnels in I don't know how many, different places. So they just kind of just randomly, and it's interesting, they only explored that one deposit. They knew of the 5 others. So, and I never found any clear reason why they weren't looking at the other 5 in terms of, especially trying to assess how much was there, because, you think that would add on to how much the UN might be interested in funding. But yeah, from what I remember, they would pull out these 360-foot long core pieces into the core shack, and I think they must have them, or there might have been a little bit too too much forethought for them. They might have sent it all off to Canada and just just pick and choose which one goes to Canada and which one stays. I don't know. I mean, it was not very systematic at all. So I would hate to think that they had some true process to what went to Canada and what didn't. Yeah, question.
It just seems like a big stretch to ever make that mine productive to ship from up in the Himalayas to Canada.
Yes,
It seems like a stretch.
yeah, the comment was, it seems like a stretch for this mine. It does, and their numbers still have worked out that they thought it was going to be, a 15% return on their $18 million investments. But I don't know. I feel like they might have missed a few line items in that. I don't know. Yeah, it was. They had high hopes. Have high hopes. It sounds like, if they're still employing people there, it's So it was crazy for me to be there. As a stupid 20-year-old American, to be like, do you not see what's really going on here? But they really believed in it, and there was a lot of national pride. I mean, they were like, this could be the first big lead zinc deposit, big metal deposit that's developed in our country. So they're really hoping to plant a big Nepalese flag in that, and for their national pride.
Yeah, to follow up on that, it just seems like maybe the motivation was commissions on raising the capital.
Yeah, the comment was commissions on raising the capital was the motivation, and yeah, maybe, and yeah, who knows? Another question?
I remember early on in the report, the comment about the cost of labor.
Uh-huh.
Phenomenally low.
Yeah. Yes, the question about the cost of labor, and yes, I found in my notes from my research that the average miner up there was probably earning 50 cents a day, and I think the mining architect and geologist were probably earning $2 a day. I mean, so obviously a lot more, but boy, not a lot.
Yeah,
There's a question of other productive mines in the area. No, and I don't really know of any that. Yeah, there's no other productive mines in and around there. There's that marble quarry I almost studied. There's a few other economic resources of minerals in the country, but it's not making a big dent in there.
yeah, I was going to ask a related question, Liz. Is there any actual mining that's productive mining going on in Nepal at all, as far as you know?
Yeah, that's a great question. I should have, just done some quick research. The two that I know of are Ganesh Himal, that's still sitting stagnant, and then that marble quarry that I was studying just south of Kathmandu actually got the Supreme Court shut it down for environmental protection reasons in, I think, 2015. And it took a while, because when I was there in 92, all the environmental groups were expecting it to be shut down in 92. And the Supreme Court finally overruled by 2015. They had all the permissions from the Department of Mines and Geology, but the Supreme Court said, nope, you can't do this anymore. It's, too environmentally fragile there, and they shut it down. So those are the two I know of. And certainly those were the two when I was brainstorming projects there that, nothing else came on the list of like, oh, then there's also this big mine here. Nothing large scale's happening. But the technical complications and hurdles that have to happen in that country are immense. So I'm not surprised. Right.
So I'm guessing there's no labs at all that are doing the assaying. How did they, they have very exact numbers. Where was all that done? And how many samples did they actually send?
The question about where all the analyses were being done and how much they sent. Originally, most of it was done from Canada, and the reason that it was sent to Canada was one of the initial exploratory companies, along with the Indian company, was from Canada, and then that Canadian company kind of changed tracks and pulled out. But I think they were still doing the analysis on, and some of it might have been done in India too. So it's not being done in Nepal. Like the, the mine and geology department doesn't have that capability, or didn't back then. Yeah, so there's all being sent out. I don't know how much of the core got shipped out. I mean, they clearly still had a lot of it in their core shack, and it's not like it got sent back, so. Yes.
That stream that went to the tailings, it's been over 30 years. What, is there a town right below that that stream goes to, and what effect it have on children in that town?
Yeah, a question on the stream that's coming out of the mine area, and any effects on villages and towns. At the time, there were just some army camps that were just downstream, but you know, it will get more diluted the farther down you get, but you know, it eventually comes to some significant villages. And as far as I know, you know, it wasn't like you got to the area and recognized there were some serious issues, health issues going on with all the children in the villages. But I did not know of anyone. I mean, the UN didn't even think that any kind of contamination could be an issue. So at the time, no one was studying any health issues or health effects on villages downstream. So I don't know.
The source of the water was out of in the mine.
Mhm.
So it had to be carried a bunch of
Oh, yeah.
bad stuff.
Maybe that's why the streams were sterile and there was going to be no impact on the water chemistry. Awesome.
So if there, I assume no more questions, and if there are, you can come up and ask Liz. I want to thank everyone who came. I want to thank our Zoom audience. Leslie, I want to thank our speaker, a small
you.
present for you.
Thank
I
you.
think it'll be meaningful. So join me in thanking Dr. King. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming.
And so the drill with the chairs is the usual thing, and there's still some hummus and things to snack on while we get everything cleaned up. And June 6th, the Great Bonneville Flood. Thanks, Liz.